there's a debate among Jews. I used to say the Jewish community, but then I got excommunicated. So there is a debate among Jews. I'm a Jew, by the way. About whether the lesson of the Holocaust should be never again to anyone or never again to us. That's what it pretty much boils down to. And there are a lot of people that believe that the lesson of the Holocaust was never again to us, never again to the Jews. And because we suffered this tremendous crime against humanity, we have the right to do whatever it takes to keep ourselves safe. In fact, we even think we get a kind of get one genocide free card out of this. You know, scratch the surface and you'll get there. You'll get there. And there is another strain in the Jewish tradition that said that the lesson of the Holocaust was never again to anyone, and that it is precisely because of what we experienced as Jews that we must denounce racism, denounce systems of segregation wherever they crop up, even, especially when they crop up amongst our own. I was in Geneva recently for a conference called the Durban Review Conference. It took place at the end of April. In the press, particularly in the Israeli and American press, it was not referred to by its proper name, the Durban Review Conference. It was called Durban 2, aka Hate Fest. Now, for those of you who follow this, the Durban Review Conference, which was a follow-up to the 2001 World Conference Against Racism in Durban, South Africa, was the subject of an extraordinary propaganda campaign to equate the word Durban with the word hate fest, anti-Semitic hate fest. And this word came up all the time to delegitimize the conference. And there are a whole series of groups that devoted themselves to this project. In Israel, the group that was really at the forefront of this was NGO Monitor, associated with the Jerusalem Center, headed by Gerald Steinberg. There was also UN Watch in Geneva, Eye on the UN. There's in fact a whole sort of infrastructure of groups that were born after the first Durban conference in order to prevent a follow-up to that conference. And as the event drew near in April, what you saw is almost every major Zionist organization around the world lining up to call for governments to boycott the Durban Review Conference. Israel boycotted the conference, so did Canada. There was a thought that the new administration of Barack Obama would break with Bush policy and attend this anti-racism conference, that it would be extraordinarily important symbolically as the first African-American president for him to do that. And they did re-engage a little bit with the negotiations, but ultimately the US did boycott. And once they decided to boycott, many other countries pulled out very, very quickly. Italy, Germany, the Netherlands. We heard a lot of things about the claims that were made about this conference that actually were not true. The declaration, the official declaration that came out of the conference in 2001, it actually didn't say Israel is a racist state. The only thing it did was extremely mild, extremely banal. It said that we recognize the plight of the Palestinian people, we encourage speedy peace negotiations, everybody has a right to security. So there was this chasm between what people thought this conference was and what actually happened. The first Durban conference was a big deal. And there were 16 heads of state that traveled to Durban. There were, I think, 48 ministers, or foreign ministers, who traveled to Durban. Fidel Castro went, Arafat went. Now, one of the reasons why people don't really remember what happened and what was significant about that first Durban conference, and why it is so easy to spread misinformation about it and claim that things happened that didn't happen, is because that conference ended on September the 9th, 2001. So there were 2 days when the truth could have seeped into the culture, after which point, I write a lot about shock in my work, after which point the discussion was decisively changed to the endless war on terror. As I looked into this, what I found was that the reason why there is such a zealous opposition to the Durban process is because the birth of the BDS movement, of the BDS campaign, of equating the practices of the Israeli state with the practices of apartheid South Africa, that was really first fully articulated in Durban in 2001 at the NGO Forum. If you look at the NGO declaration, it says that Israel is practicing a form of apartheid, and it calls for the use of precisely these tactics in order to isolate Israel and force it to comply with international law. And so, as all of you know who are part of the Boycott Committee, the attempt to stop this campaign is very, very strong. But in a lot of the writing about and against this movement that we are part of here tonight, traces the origin back to Durban 2001. And so what we see is a tremendous fear of the Palestinian cause becoming the next South Africa, becoming the next big global civil society movement. And there is a history to this too, because there were two anti-racism conferences before the UN anti-racism conferences, before the one in 2001. Most recent one was in 1983. Both of those conferences focused on South African apartheid. And they were very, very important gathering places. And why this idea of an international civil society broad-based movement on the South African model is such a threat. Because during that conference, a lot of very significant things happened. Arguably the most significant one was that all over the global South, but particularly in Africa, people refused this idea that they would just have a nice, easy conference about racism, where everybody would agree that it's bad and it's wrong, and they would sign well-meaning declarations, but most of all they would just pat each other on the back for all the good things that they've done, like defeat apartheid in South Africa. That was what was supposed to happen in Durban. But what actually happened, and we would know this, I think, if it were for September 11th, was that racism was put in a historical context. And the consensus, what I'm calling the Durban consensus, was that there's no way to understand the particular form of racism that we have, which is white supremacy, which says that people with white skin are somehow better than people with darker skin, and the darker the skin, the worse it gets. This system can only properly be understood in the context of the history of colonialism. And in particular, the economic history of the need for two very profitable things. One, free labor, two, free land. So contemporary racism, as opposed to just general suspicion of otherness and difference, contemporary racism needs to be understood as the theory that allowed European settlers to rationalize slavery on the one hand and land theft on the other. So in order to justify treating Africans as cattle, you had to have a theory that said that Africans were not fully human. You had to have a theory that justified that. So racism wasn't the end, it was the means. It was the means for this extraordinarily profitable proposition.